Hi friends, Rick Edwards here with Sunday School University. Today we're going to be looking at another contextual video, which means it's not specific to a lesson, but rather is about a larger context within which the lessons fit. We're actually looking at a timeline of the events, the major events in the books of 1st and 2nd Kings. Now I may refer to it as the book of Kings because originally this book was one book. Because of its size, it was later broken into two books. So we have the books of 1st and 2nd Kings, but originally it was just the book of Kings. And it's one continuous story, one unified story all the way through it. But there's several events that are significant to helping us understand what the books are about. And as in most cases, the historical context enables us to better understand and interpret the passages that we're looking at. So that's what we're talking about today. The books of 1st and 2nd Kings, a timeline of the major events that take place in those books. Okay? So the book opens, the first two chapters, chapters 1 and 2 of 1st Kings, the book opens with David quite elderly, and we've talked about this in other videos, but David is old, he's debilitated essentially, and he's very close to death. He actually dies in the second chapter. So all this does is set up the fact that David is now exiting the stage, so to speak. Solomon's coming on. So Solomon follows him. You've probably read about this, how Solomon established his reign, his rule in this united kingdom. But when you get down to chapter 12 of 1st Kings, we have the story of Rehoboam, who does not listen to the people. He does not make wise decisions, and consequently, the kingdom splits. The northern 10 tribes that are going to be called Israel split away from the southern tribe of Judah, which Rehoboam is leading, and then the new tribes, Israel in the north, is under Jeroboam. So the kingdom divides in chapter 12. Now, there's some debate over these dates, so I'm going to give you some rough dates that are approximate dates, and I understand that there can be a lot of debate. And I've chosen these dates for a particular reason to help you kind of get a sense of what's happening and where it's happening and when it's happening. But understand, I know these dates are approximate, okay? So don't throw rocks at me. Don't send me emails telling me I'm wrong. These are approximate dates. But we're suggesting, many people believe that David died somewhere around 962. Solomon reigned for roughly 40 years following that, so that the kingdom divides in approximately 922 BC. Okay? Now, things rock along. There's a lot of history in here that I'm not including on this timeline. Things rock along until 722 BC. In 2 Kings chapter 17, verse 16, we read about Israel, the northern kingdom, the northern kingdom of Israel, the capital of Samaria, is finally conquered by Assyria, the country of Assyria. And for all practical purposes, the 10 northern tribes, the northern kingdom of Israel is dispersed. The people are dispersed, and for all practical purposes, the kingdom of Israel is gone. It disappears from history. It exists no longer. Very significant time when the northern kingdom of Israel is conquered and essentially goes away in approximately 722 BC. Okay? Then we come down to about 135 years later. Again, these dates are approximate. About 135 years later, Jerusalem is finally destroyed by the Babylonians. So the Assyrians were the dominant power here, but in the meanwhile, Babylon rises in its prominence and its power, takes over things. So now it is the dominant power. It comes in, conquers Judah, the southern kingdom, destroys Jerusalem, and destroys the temple. You can read about this in 2 Kings chapter 25, just all toward the end of the book of Kings, okay? And that happens in approximately 587 BC. Now, some people are going to say it's 586. Some will say 587. Understand, one of the reasons that it's not always clear is because these big events like this didn't always happen overnight, okay? Sometimes they take time. Armies march in, sieges take place, and sometimes it can take months or even years for things to happen. But a lot of people generally accept that Jerusalem fell and Solomon's temple was destroyed and Jerusalem was destroyed in approximately 587. At that point, Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar, takes most of the people, all the significant people, certainly the people that were royal, tradespeople, business people. They're taken to Babylon for what would become the 70-year Babylonian captivity. And that begins in roughly 587 BC. Well, the book ends, the book of Kings, 2 Kings, ends with a little story about a King Jehoiakim who is pardoned by a king named Evil-Merodach. Now, evil is just part of his name. It's not an adjective like we use the word evil. He was Nebuchadnezzar's son, and when he takes control of the kingdom, Babylon, he pardons Jehoiakim, who had been the king back here when Jerusalem was destroyed. So Jehoiakim is pardoned, although he's not allowed to go back. He's just pardoned. He's come out. He's given some limited freedom, but he has a degree of freedom there in Babylon. And that's happens. You read about that in chapter 25, verses 27 through 30. It's the last thing we read in the book of Kings, okay? And that happened in approximately 561 BC, okay? So here's some things I want to point out. If we consider that David died somewhere around 962, 961, 963, somewhere in there, and there is debate over that, but let's assume we do that. And the reason I'm choosing that date in part is to help you remember this and kind of get a picture of what's going on here. 962 or 961 to 561, this is the first part of the book. This is the last part of the book. And you can see, if you do the math, we're talking about a 400-year period of time from the beginning of 1 Kings to the end of 2 Kings, very close to 400 years. Maybe a little more, maybe a little less, but pretty close to 400 years of time that we're talking about in the book of Kings. Now, some other things I would point out. If you look and start with when the kingdom divides, approximately 922 BC, and look at when the northern kingdom falls, 722 BC, you're looking at about a 200-year period of time. Now, I'm not saying that anything is significant about the year 200, the number of years, 200. I am saying that will help you remember that the kingdom divided and Israel was conquered about 200 years later. So the northern kingdom of Israel, as its own unique separate kingdom, lasted for only roughly 200 years. And this will help you remember that number, okay? Again, it's not exact, but you just kind of know. The whole timeline, roughly 200 years. By the time Israel divides to the time it split until it is conquered, roughly 200 years. So you've got some time before it and some time after it. So the southern kingdom of Judah rocks on a little bit longer for about 135 years, but is finally conquered in 587 BC. Now, a couple of other things that are significant here that I would point out. As I said, the books cover approximately 400 years. Just keep that in mind. Now, the exiles began returning in 538 BC. Okay? This event is not recorded in the book of Kings, but we know this happened. We read about this in other places in the Old Testament. We know from history that the Persian Empire came to prominence and conquered Babylon, the Babylonian Empire, took power in roughly 538, 539 BC. And when that happened, the new king, Cyrus the Great, issued a decree that said to the people of Israel, the Jews, you can go home if you wish to do so. And many of them did, in fact, do that. Not all of them. Many of them stayed in Babylon, but some of them began to go home. And they began to go home typically in waves or groups of people. Okay? That began to happen in 538 BC. They began to rebuild Jerusalem. You can read about these in books like Nehemiah and Ezra. We read about these things. These events are not recorded in the books of 1st and 2nd Kings, but they're important for you to understand the larger context of these two books. So in 538, Jews begin returning to Palestine or their homeland. They start working on the temple and begin rebuilding the temple. Now, this is not going to be like Solomon's temple. They weren't very excited about this second temple. Solomon's temple was the first temple. Now they're rebuilding what we come to call the second temple. It was completed and dedicated in approximately 517 BC. Okay? Now notice this. Jeremiah had predicted that the Babylonian captivity would last approximately 70 years. It's very difficult for us to know when that 70 years began and when the 70 years ends. Different people have different theories. And I'm not saying that what I'm about to tell you is the exact right thing, but it will help you remember some of the major events that go on here. So if you back up and realize that the temple was destroyed in 587 BC. That's the first temple, Solomon's temple, was destroyed in 587 BC. And notice when the second temple was dedicated, 517 BC, it's easy to do the math and see that there's roughly a 70-year period of time between the destruction of the first temple and the dedication of the second temple. 70 years. So again, I'm not saying that that's necessarily how you measure the 70-year captivity, but it is a convenient way to come up with the number 70 to help you remember, to help all of us remember that the captivity lasted about 70 years. Now, some would say, well, the captivity actually ended here in 538. Yes, you could make that argument. And if you do that and you back up to 70 years, you end up back at 608 BC. Well, there were, in fact, some people deported as early as the early 600s of BC. And so you could say that that's when the captivity started. 538 is when it ended. It's difficult to know. It's difficult to come up with 70 years. I'm just telling you that one way to remember, an easy way to remember the 70 years is that the first temple was destroyed in 587. The second temple was dedicated in 517, which comes up to a nice round 70 years. Okay? Now, finally, I want to note that the author, as he's writing the book of Kings, the author wanted the people to know why the exile happened, which was because of their sin, and he makes this point quite clear. They were in exile because of their sin, their national sin and their individual sin, and he wanted them to anticipate the coming Messiah. So by this time, the people are already expecting and anticipating a Messiah would come through the Davidic line, the Davidic dynasty. They're already beginning to anticipate, and this was actually true long before now. They're anticipating that one of these days a Messiah would come. And the author of Kings was wanting to help them understand that one of the reasons they were in exile was because the human monarchy had failed and allowed the people to move into sin, and that caused the exile. But there's still hope that one of these days the Messiah is still going to come through the Davidic dynasty, which is one reason why the story ends with Jehoiakim in Babylon to make the point he was of the Davidic dynasty. So the book ends on this note of hope that even though things are bad, even though we're in Babylon, the Davidic dynasty is still alive and is finding favor in Babylon. So these are some interesting things. Now we're going to do another video that provides some more context about what's happening and how the people were thinking when they came back from Babylon, and what the author of Kings wanted them to perceive and how he wanted them to think in light of all the stuff that had happened through these 400 years. That's going to be a separate video. In the meanwhile, I hope this is helpful, and we'll see you next time.